the right to have someone rule over you by your consent, you can't have liberty unless there's that, if that's there. So,
Okay.
We get actually concepts of self-government as a community, right? And we're actually going to have probably a whole series on self-government, the principle of self-government and its different aspects. But this specifically we're talking about here is self-government as a community. It says in Deuteronomy 1:13, and you can go to Exodus 18 to see where this happened, because this is referring back to Exodus 18.
Right. Yeah.
But Deuteronomy 1:13 says, "Choose for your tribes wise, understanding, experienced men, and I will appoint them as your heads." Right? The idea here was Moses was being burdened and trying to deal with all the little tiny cases of issues that people had and all the big ones, and it was becoming too much. His father-in-law, Jethro, stepped in.
Good old Jethro.
Like, I love Jethro. Stepped in and was like, hey, this is not good. You can't do this. And he gave him wisdom to let the people choose their own leaders for over, like, I think it's tens, 50s, hundreds, and thousands, right? And he tells them, like, all the big cases you take to the Lord before them, but the little ones, let those leaders deal with those, right? That's actually the idea of federalism, but another topic. But it's right here. The people get to choose. Yeah. And that principle is carried into the New Testament in Acts 6, where the disciples have all the believers have an issue with, like, I think it's daily distribution of the giving of food and stuff.
Yeah, to the needy, I think.
Right. And this is the institution of the office of deacons.
Yep.
And it says, "Therefore, brothers, pick out from among you 7 men of good repute, full of the Spirit and of wisdom, whom we will appoint to this duty, to serve." That's the purpose.
Yeah.
But just that point that they get to choose. And God being sovereign, God sets all authority. We see that throughout Scripture, right? Well, God chooses, God sets through the people's choice, right? We've heard the saying, you get the government you deserve. Well, in some real senses you do, and God allows that. But all this to say, this concept of a community governing themselves, choosing their own leaders and stuff, it is all to be under God's authority, under his standard of right and wrong. But there you have it in the Scriptures, this concept of choosing your own leaders and having a self-governing community.
Yeah. Yeah, those are some of the biggest things that I kind of notice, is like when you have the communal, like there's so much focus on the communal, is that it's just this thing that you see, sort of in the Old and the New Testament example of, God's people coming together and then, sort of acting this out, this form of governments in this communal sense. And then I suppose sort of the second thing is, again, you see in this sort of the connections to, like, liberty and freedom, and you can even connect it back to Genesis and the idea of dominion and image bearing of God, is how God, like, gives his people the freedom to say, like, to choose the men that they think are worthy. He says, like, pick the best ones, he gives them some instructions, but you see even that principle in there of, like, he gives them this, like, awesome freedom to be, like, to work these things out among themselves. You know what I mean? And he gives that to Moses as this gift to say, like, hey, it's okay if these people, like, deal with these issues on their own, like, you don't have to micromanage everything that they do in that kind of way. So those are both a couple of things that I thought were really cool about that.
Yeah. And I think you're absolutely right on that, because, like, just for that list, it gives them, like, a standard to, like, these are the type of men you want. It's like they have to hate covetousness. So, that way they're above being bribed.
Yep. We don't follow that standard in our modern day American government.
We'd like to think so. Yeah. But they have to hate covetousness. They have to be men who, I believe it says that they fear the Lord, and men of truth. I think it says truth. Okay. It's in Exodus 18. Our listeners can fact check that one. But he gives that standard, right? So those are the qualities you're wanting to look for in whoever the leader is. And back to, like you said in Genesis, with the whole where Jesus was there, but when God gives dominion, that stewardship to us, self-governing, no one has the authority to rule over you without your consent because you've been given sovereignty. And if they can, then you didn't really have sovereignty.
Right.
So,
and it kind of goes back to this whole thing of like, you retain your like identity, you retain your like dignity of being an image bearer.
right.
But you appoint a person to do it simply out of practical reasons.
Practical reasons too. but see, in art, I like the way we actually use it in America, in the United States. We call them representatives. They represent you.
The people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It might be an empty word now, but that was the original concept.
Yeah.
So, just on all that, if someone can bind you without your consent, and by binding, I'm referring to if they can in any way infringe upon your rights, limit your exercise of them as God has given you that right, then you are not really free, no matter how soft that binding is. And that's a concept that you have to understand that for self-government. You have to understand, like, if they can do it without your consent, no matter how nice it is, no matter how soft it is, they are infringing upon the rights that God has given you.
Yeah, I feel like that's something that you see, not to like name necessarily a bunch of examples, but like, I don't know, I feel like just in general, like as humans, we tend to do that where it's like, you're willing to give up. Like if the government instills a law that's like technically infringes upon your rights, but kind of makes everybody happy.
Right.
We tend to be okay with that, even though it's like not really maybe constitutional, or it's not really like doesn't actually like uphold our rights in the best possible way. And historically tends to be when you allow those laws, then they, politicians and people utilize those things to take advantage of the people because they're like, oh, I've been given this concession. Now I have the freedom to do all these other things.
Right. And I think a point needs to be made, though, is like we as a community, we decide that, okay, I'm willing to limit some of my right, not give it up, not give it away, but limit it in a way, like think about speed limits, traffic lights, we agree those are things for our safety. And yeah, that's probably a really good idea. And it's not there to take away our freedom to drive as fast as we want, wherever we want. It's there to protect us and everybody else around us.
Right. Well, and even that, though, goes back to rights, because that goes back to the fundamental right of life.
Right.
And that, like,
and
you don't have the freedom to drive 99 miles per hour at all times because you might kill somebody else.
Or take your own life.
Yeah.
That's another issue.
That's part of it. But the main thing is so you don't kill somebody else. You want to go drive 90 miles hours, off a cliff. Well, so be it.
No.
It's not ideal, but you technically have the right to do that,
But even that concept, each of the rights that we've talked about so far carry with them the responsibility, and this is, I think, an important point. Every right that you have from God carries with it the responsibility to love God who gave it to you with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself, to protect their rights and liberty, right?
Yeah.
Again, just rights that we talked about in the first episode. We really hammered that idea. These are just because God gave them. But you have a responsibility with each of these, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, even back to the whole thing with the traffic lights, we might agree to that. We might give our consent. The problem is those things wouldn't be good if we didn't give our consent to it. But they are good because in self-governing, we're giving our consent that this is a good thing for all of us.
Yeah.
Right?
For sure. Now, I feel like we've been talking about self-government, and so it kind of like, it feels like it begs the question a little bit, not to go too far in it, but like what government's duty is.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you want to touch on that.
Well, this is a massive topic.
Yeah.
So just briefly, because we're gonna do episodes on this.
Yeah.
Briefly, government's duty, simply put, is to protect the rights and liberty of the people. That is its ultimate good.
Cool.
It's its ultimate end, right? You can see this in Proverbs 2, Romans 13, where we could just see some really pointed scriptures at government, or in Proverbs 2 it's somebody who's going to end up in government.
Yeah.
It's addressed to somebody who's going to end up being king one day. Gives the principles of what the purpose of government is: to punish evil, reward good, to administer righteousness, justice, equity, every good path, aka protect the rights and liberty of the people.
Yeah.
Protect that which God says is good and right for individuals to have and enjoy. Right.
Cool. I love it.
Again, that is way more.
It's the 15-second version of government.
It needs to be unpacked, and we plan to do so. So be looking out for those episodes.
Cool.
But all this to say, as we love to talk about liberty in general, and we've brought it up a couple times now.
Just keep banging on about liberty.
I'm not going to stop. I love liberty. It's my God-given right, and it's such a blessing from God.
Yep.